The world stopped. The world no longer mattered, nothing mattered. Wednesday felt the unendurable agony of the age. As swift as an oncoming storm, Esther Sinclair thrust a silver dagger into her only daughter's back. Pushing as hard as she possibly could, the silver blade slipping through skin, muscle, and flesh. She grunted with effort as she twisted the knife hard. Enid's face awash with a scream that she couldn't expel, the knife having driven what air she had from her lungs. Betrayed blue eyes met Esther's dull ones as her mother ripped the knife out of Enid. "Mama!" Enid managed to wheeze out with little breath she had left before her strength left her, and she collapsed to the floor. Wednesday tossed her weapons aside with a clatter, everything else forgotten. The battle that had been raging around them came to a halt as Wednesday's grief manifested in the sky. The moon moved in front of the sun, her grief causing a solar eclipse. Lightning flashed across the sky. And rain began to thunder down. Wednesday skidded on her knees at Enid's side, carefully cradling Enid's head with her hands. She pressed her hand to her lower back to feel the wound. It was serious, she was losing a lot of blood. And she couldn't heal her. She tried, she extended her grace, but it would not heal. The wound having been inflicted with a fatal material, a supernaturally fatal material, and she was a demon, healing was against her very nature. Esther's injuries from her torture could only be healed because they were not inflicted with silver. "Enid! Enid!" she shouted desperately. The blonde opened her eyes, if only by a little bit. Whence? Her eyes fluttered, eyes clearly not in focus. "I'm here, Enid, I'm here," she uttered, hand coming up to brush Enid's blonde hair out of her face. "We're gonna fix you, okay? We're going to get you some help," Wednesday said, her voice shaking as she struggled to rein in her panic. "When's W?" Enid tried to say but choked and started to cough, blood gracing her teeth. "No, no. No, save your strength, me soul, I." Enid coughed, more blood leaving the corners of her mouth. "I love, why yo, you Wens," Enid said, smiling painfully. "Don't you dare fucking die on me, Sinclair," Wednesday nearly shouted, rocking the blonde gently, in an attempt to keep the blonde in the waking world. Enid's breathing was coming and going as a pained wheeze. "We've only just started, you and I," Wednesday said, tears now racing down her cheeks. "Don't go where I can't be with you," Wednesday begged. Wednesday gently rocked the girl in arms as everyone watched on, unable to look away as Enid Sinclair lay dying in the arms of the demon. There was a sudden commotion and roar of rage and the sounds of grunting, but Wednesday could only focus on the girl in her arms. "We've got so much to do. Have a family. Be happy. Don't go, Enid, don't leave me," Wednesday uttered, sorrow already beginning to claim her. Willa," she gasped out. Her hand came up to grasp the front of Wednesday's coat. Say. "Dot it back, please." Her breathing was becoming more shallow by the second, and Wednesday could feel her heartbeat grow that ever more slower. There was not much time left. Wednesday gently cupped the side of Enid's face, allowing the weakening girl to look her in the eyes. I love you so much. I loved you from the moment I saw you. The moon can't shine without its sun," Wednesday said, her voice barely above a whisper as her body nearly shook with sobs. "You were, the best thing, that ever happened to me." Enid's used the last of her strength to convey it. Her smile faint, but it warmed Wednesday's heart for the last time. The hand grasping onto Wednesday's coat went lax, falling limply back down. Blue eyes retreated behind fluttering eyelids. And Enid Sinclair exhaled her last, dying in the arms of the demon she fell in love with. Wednesday Adams felt herself die with the love of her life. There were soft footsteps that dared to approach the grieving demon, footsteps that did not heed the swirling maelstrom that was Wednesday. The person waved his hand, sweeping away the rain and the lightning. He snapped his fingers and the moon resumed its natural cycle, the eclipse seemingly never happening. The person knelt down beside them, and Wednesday raised her tear-stained face to meet the golden-green eyes of Adon, who smiled down at her sadly. "Bring her back," she growled, bringing Enid's body closer to hers protectively. Adon rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder, comfortingly. "I'm sorry, Sario, but I can't," Adonai said sadly. Wednesday stiffened and carefully lay Enid down where she had fallen, treating the blonde with utter reverence and devotion. Wednesday spun on her heel, her body a blur of motion. She lashed out with her sword, the blade slicing into Adon's body. Her other hand free, she withdrew her angel blade and started to stab Adon's body repeatedly. "But your God!" Wednesday roared the words, as tears angrily escaped, but sorrow overtook her, her assault on the one above all getting weaker. "Your God!" Wednesday said in the smallest of voices. The blade clattered to the floor. God had sustained no injury but felt every stab Wednesday dished out, letting him feel a slither of the pain that Wednesday felt. God's golden green eyes roved the face of his child, his second favorite, after only Lucifer himself. He drew the crying raven into a hug, placing his hands lovingly around her, letting his own grace soothe her as best as he could. "I know," God said. "I never wanted this to happen to you or her," he said. "Then why?" Wednesday whined out, tearing herself out of his embrace. "Why make me fall in love with her only to take her away? Do you hate me that much?" Wednesday's words triggered so much hurt in him he almost recoiled. "I wanted the best for you both. That vision you both shared was real and had every chance of happening," God said, but his golden green eyes became narrowed in anger. "But some didn't get the message," he said, his voice laced with rage. His arm shot out, and Ishmael was dragged out of the crowd. The angel towered over their father's more innocent form, but Ishmael saw the real wrath that underlay there, wrath that saw him throw thousands of angels down into hell. Wrath that caused the flood, the 10 plagues of Egypt. "Father, I dash." "Silence," God said. "Your overzealotry has gone too far this time, Ishmael. God will hear, but you didn't hear me, did you? You were gone." Ishmael screamed in his defense. "I was following orders," Ishmael begged. God's eyes flickered dangerously, head turning to regard his son. "Did you really use that defense on me?" "Me?" God seethed. "You have free will, you could have chose not to obey them, and when we do we get tossed into the pit," Ishmael said bitterly. God was about to open his mouth when there was a sudden whoosh. God turned to see Death, the horseman, with his cane and funeral parlor-esque suit. God turned to face Ishmael again. "I will deal with you later," he said before turning around to face the horseman. "Death," God greeted. "Brother," Death said warmly. God smiled painfully. "You will not come near her," Wednesday said, facing down the horseman, both sword and blade in hand. "It is time, Wednesday. Let her go to the enchanted forest, let her be at peace," Death said, his voice calm, gentle. "No," Wednesday said, glaring. Death turned to look at God. "Why are your children so stubborn?" God smiled sadly. "They get it from me." Death tooted and moved forwards. "She deserves to be at peace," Death said, his tone revealed nothing but the horseman was impressed. Not many beings stood up to him. Not this ferociously. "She deserves to live, she deserves to be alive, she deserves a future, ha! She got what she deserved." "Disgusting, pathetic runt!" Esther screamed. Wednesday's eyes dangerously turned to regard Esther, who was being restrained by both Gomez and Morticia, the roar of rage having come from Gomez, having restrained her. Wednesday could at least fulfill her promise. She would spend the rest of eternity personally torturing Esther Sinclair. She had watched Silent Hill recently, and there was a specific scene she wanted to replicate, one with Esther being strung up in the air by barbed wire, with pointed barbs coming from below too. It was a gruesome scene. But it gave Wednesday so many wonderful ideas. But her momentarily lapse in her concentration caused her to miss the silent stride of Death as he reached Enid. "No!" But it was too late. Death pressed a gentle finger to Enid's temple and whispery strands of glowing white was withdrawn from Enid's chest. It floated up, halting several feet above the body, condensing into a glowing ball. Enid's soul. Death carefully wrapped his hand round the ethereal ball of light. Wednesday watched as Enid's soul pulsated and shimmered. Her was as beautiful as she was in life, even in death. "Enid," Wednesday whispers tearfully, the reality of everything that was happening was starting to sink in. Death carefully, with practiced care and gentleness one would not assume of Death, took her soul into his grasp before making to leave. Nodding to God a final time, he vanished in a puff of black smoke. God watched on sadly. Thing came scuttling over as fast as fingers would carry him. Shrugging off the small belt of throwing stars, he tapped the ground rapidly near Wednesday. "I know where he's gone." "Yes, to heaven," Wednesday said bitterly. "No. He has to travel like all regular reapers to get to the right realm." Wednesday's eyes widened. "The conduit to the old ones." Thing quickly scaled Wednesday's leg and onto her shoulder. She looked at God as Thing waved his fingers in an intricate and complicated pattern. I'm getting her back, she growled at her father. Suddenly Wednesday and Thing vanished, leaving the combatants and God to ponder her next move. Resurrection requires a great and equal personal sacrifice in return. If the natural order doesn't get such a payment, the consequences are cosmic, God said to himself, shaking his head, knowing that there would a great price to come. Although Gomez, having watched the exchange, noticed the twinkle in God's eyes. Like he knew something the rest of them didn't. It brought little comfort. Death appeared in the great caverns, where the river flowed and the bioluminescent lichen grew and festered, no caretaker to temper the growing of their weeds. Beside him appeared Enid Sinclair, in the clothes she died in, minus the wounds, both scars and stab wound. Where am I? Her first question was. Her face was vague, like she had forgotten something important. I don't remember. What happened? She asked, looking at the gaunt face of Death. Death straightened up as he gestured for them to walk. Enid Sinclair, you are in the conduit of the realms, and the ancient land of the old ones. How did I get here? She asked, gazing around at the frankly gorgeous flora that grew here. Your time came, he said cryptically. Her eyes narrowed. Who are you? His eyes pierced her, like she was having her entire life examined by something primordial. I am Death, the horseman and your guide, he said, clasping his cane down in front of him. Death? She squeaked. He tried to smile reassuringly, but it looked more sinister, his gaunt face making him look skeletal. Yes, I wanted the honor of taking you to the world beyond personally. Me? Why me? I'm nothing special. She chuckled bitterly, looking at the floor dejectedly. On the contrary, you are more special, you realize, Death said, leading her to the most expansive cavern. Stars twinkled, littering the ceiling, seeming to have no surface but rather looking like the expanse of space. First of all, you redeemed a demon, something that no one has ever managed to accomplish. Enid's face lit up in a shy blush. Second, you are the girl without evil, without malice, a righteous human being. You are an embodiment of good. Am I really all that? Enid asked shyly, right arm grasping her left, as her body prickled at the praise. Yes, quite and much more, he said. I would argue there are few humans that will ever measure up. I'm not. I'm. She took a deep breath and let it go. Arguing with cosmic beings didn't get her anywhere. Wednesday was proof of this. I don't remember what happened, she said again. You wouldn't. Souls don't remember their own demise, avoids any unnecessary trauma, Death supplied. Isn't that convenient? Enid mumbled. Death pointedly ignored the sarcasm. Your mother, she was the one to send you to the worlds beyond. Enid grimaced and closed her eyes. Somehow she wasn't shocked, not after the way her mother had treated her for so many years. And Wednesday? She asked. Death nearly paused his stride, but continued nonetheless. Answering the hard questions was his job after all. She is unharmed, Death said slowly. Enid felt a wave of instant relief wash through her. Good, Enid said, smiling sadly. That's good, Enid said, her voice breaking. I'm never going to see her again, am I? Enid questioned. Death paused in his stride, seeing the emotional distress of the soul in his charge. It was never easy. Death was never easy. I'm sorry, but I don't believe you will, Death said, his voice gentle as it could be. Enid seemed to nod resolutely to herself. If it's any consolation, her last words to you were of love and of how she fell for you on sight. It was enough to rip a gut-wrenching sob out of Enid's throat, burying her face in her hands as she choked on her own tears. Death reached out and placed an arm round the girl, keeping her moving forwards. Her cries of infinite sorrow reverberated around the endless, empty caverns. And Death saw it before she did, the archway. It was a stone archway set in the middle of a gentle waterfall. A shallow pond surrounded it. Bioluminescent lichen grew in abundance here, and transparent glowing flowers floated around the clear blue pond. But there seemed to be a light beyond the archway, and light itself was drawn to it. Orbs of light seemed to float away from anything that was a light source here and be gently caressed into the portal. They stood on the edge of the shoreline, and watched as the orbs floated into the archway. We're here, aren't we? Enid asked tentatively, looking at the archway. Yes. Here at last, on the shores of the sacred pond, lies the worlds beyond. Enid looked up at the imposing figure of Death. There's no way to go back to her, is there? Enid asked. No, the only path open to you now is ahead to the world beyond. What's on the other side? she asked, looking back at the portal. The world's beyond, Death simply said. Jesus Christ, why are all you guys so damn vague? Enid nearly shouted, exasperated. Death is just another journey, one that all will take, Death said. The path before you is set, all you need to do is step through, Death said. Enid nodded, and she lifted her foot to take a step. Her foot entered the cool water of the pond, the water barely covering the top of her foot. Neither Death nor Enid heard the frantic running that could be heard faintly, their attention entirely wrapped on the archway before them. She took her second step forward, cautious and tentative. Death watched, cane clasped in front of him. His charge now over, all she had to do was walk through the door. She was so close now she could feel the warm embrace that seemed to beckon to her, to come find peace within, and Enid's soul yearned for such a thing after years of a loveless existence. She so cried out for the peace that was to come, everything else temporarily forgotten, the power of the archway drawing her in. She stopped, her brow furrowed as a voice spoke to her inside her head. What about Wednesday? How could she have forgotten? It felt like such a traitorous thing, something to be ashamed of, ashamed that she had slipped her mind even if only for the most fleeting of moments. Another voice, not the same as before, spoke up in her mind. I can't leave her. Not when she came for us. The footsteps echoed off the cavern walls, and Death turned his head and he frowned in mere annoyance before sighing. He was too old for this. Enid! Wednesday shouted, scratching her voice, her desperation making her vocal cords almost bleed with the ferocity of her shout. Enid paused, completely frozen as she heard her voice. Willa? Her voice was quiet, disbelief passing across her face and then anger turning to face Death, who merely shrugged. What can I say? She is nothing if not persistent. Wednesday was sprinting, using her molting wings to propel her forwards, over leaps and bounds, across ruins and debris, crushing flora that hissed in return as she passed by, focusing only on getting to Enid. What are you doing here, Wednesday? Enid asked, her voice small and hoarse. Wednesday came crashing into Enid, tackling her away from the door to the worlds beyond. They tumbled across the cavern as Death watched on with mild interest. Wednesday caught Enid's head from behind before it could collide with the floor. Her braids were wild, messy, her clothing torn and eyes brimming with unshed sorrow. Do you think I love you so little that I would not follow you into death itself? Wednesday said, her voice low. Enid had never heard it so gentle, so vulnerable. You died. Enid almost screamed, causing Wednesday to wince at the volume. No thing brought me here, she said, her eyes looking over to the appendage in question, giving Enid a little wave. But to answer your question, I'm here to bring you back, Wednesday said. But Death said the only path before me was this 1 inch, she said, head looking at the door. The warm feeling of peace called to her again, and her soul yearned to be there, before Wednesday pushed her face to look at her again. Don't look at the archway, Wednesday warned. It draws in souls that have died, tempting them to accept the peace that it offers. Is it dangerous? Enid asked. She was tempted to look again but kept Wednesday's eyes in her view. No, it's the door to paradise. But its power to draw souls makes things less difficult, Wednesday said, bringing them to their feet. Wednesday, you know that there is no other path before her, let her be at peace. Death interjecting. Wednesday turned to glare at the horseman. I'm taking her back, Wednesday growled, placing herself in front of Enid. Death sighed. You know that resurrection is against the natural order. Wednesday didn't even blink. Fuck the natural order. Death drew himself up to his full height, his gaunt face looking deathly. Wednesday even took a step back. There was a reason why many feared the horseman. And released the cosmic horror? Cosmic horror? Enid squeaked. Yes, you're standing in the ruins of their great city. The old ones were defeated but could never be properly destroyed. They built themselves into the framework of the natural order. If it is violated in such a fashion, the old ones will be released. There aren't enough archangels this time to fight them. The universe would die, screaming, burning, being devoured alive, an eternity of suffering for all. Even for those in paradise, Death said. Enid turned to regard Wednesday sadly, her smile blemished by falling tears. We can't let that happen, Wella, Enid said. Wednesday shook her head in defiance. I can't live without you, Enid. Enid took Wednesday's hand into her own, fingers stroking the top of her hand delicately. I wouldn't trade anything for the time we had together. The Goth's eyes fluttered shut, if only to stop the tears from falling. I have never loved anything more, Wednesday quietly replied. Enid pushed forwards, enveloping Wednesday with a kiss filled with everything that could never be said. Wednesday pulled Enid in desperately by the waist, drawing them together. Enid leaned up and pressed a final loving kiss to her angel's forehead. Letting her lips linger for another second before pulling away, their clasped hands falling away from each other as she turned to regard Death. "I'm ready." Death nodded solemnly, gesturing towards the archway. Enid allowed herself to look at the archway and let the feeling of peace awash over her as stepped forth. Her shoes entering the pond once more, she didn't look back, knowing she wouldn't have the strength to push forwards if she looked at her soulmate again. She was mere inches away from stepping through, the feeling of peace and comfort overpowering. She lifted a foot. Wait! There was a snap of fingers and Enid's body was frozen in place by Death. Wednesday looked at Death questioningly. "There's one thing that can be done. She can be resurrected, but it comes with a price, one that's both great in magnitude and equal in value, that must be paid." Wednesday knew what that price was. There was not a single second in delay in her mind. She would pay it. Very well. "Wait, what price?" Enid said, but there was no answer. Instead, she heard Death snap his fingers once more, and she was enveloped in a flash of light, her soul traveling through dimensions and multicolored tunnels. There was a blinding light at the end of the corridor, and Enid stretched forth a rainbow-colored hand forwards, desperately reaching for it. From within the light came an ethereal hand, transparent and pale, but she instantly recognized it as Wednesday's. She pushed forth, straining as their fingers brushed. Enid let out a ferocious roar as she pushed harder than she ever had. The multicolored tunnels behind her grew darker as the malignant darkness pursued her. The darkness that sought to drag her back down into the drowning depths, offended at the disobedience of the nature of Death. But Wednesday's hand grasped her tightly. The raven's voice echoing throughout this place between life and death. "I have you, my wolf!" The darkness seemed to screech in rage as Wednesday gave an almighty tug and Enid was pulled through the light, all-encompassing and all-blinding. "Remember, I will always protect you, you, that in all the universe I have come to cherish." Enid's eyes snapped open. Oxygen rushed into her lungs. She hacked and coughed as she choked on the air, sitting upwards as she fought to clear her airways. Wednesday's words echoed in her mind, and she realized she could not see her love in front of her. She turned her head, her face paled. "Wednesday?" she called. No response. Desperation tugged at her heart. "Wella,